Let me welcome you again. For those of you who were not here at the very beginning of our first panel, thank you so much for joining us at this Right on Crime Summit on Civil Asset Forfeiture. Again, Right on Crime is a project of the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Austin, so we're delighted that they've come up to Irving to join us today. My name's Tom Giovanetti. I'm the president of the Institute for Policy Innovation. We are your physical hosts here today, and we're pleased to be part of the Right on Crime effort. Our second panel today is going to be moderated by Derek Cohen. Let me give you a brief introduction of Derek. Derek is Deputy Director of Right on Crime and of the Center for Effective Justice at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He has a BS in Criminal Justice from Bowling Green State and an MS in Criminal Justice from the University of Cincinnati, where he's currently completing his PhD. So Derek is thoroughly immersed in the criminal justice subject. Prior to joining TPPF, Derek was a research associate with the University of Cincinnati's Institute of Crime Science. And the topic of our second panel is Understanding Forfeiture Policy, a Muddled History and a Path Forward. So please join me in welcoming Derek and our panelists, and we'll get started.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. And, following that first panel is going to be a bit of an uphill slog, but I promise you this will definitely be well worth it. I know you guys were sitting there going, yeah, that's a very robust discussion, but I wish it was a little more drier, a little more technical, and used a little bit more Latin. So we are here to oblige. Now, I kid. What we do have for you is a great panel full of experts. We have two conservative senators here to share their perspective, and we also have two policy experts, including the aforementioned Brad Cates, who actually was both an architect on the front end and in the reform efforts in New Mexico. But let's get started with introductions first, shall we? First, to my left, I'd like to, not to my left, but I would like to.
What?
I don't think anybody can actually say that.
Left.
She's not the left of anybody.
Is Senator Konni Burton. Senator Burton is a current Texas State Senator for District 10. She is assigned to the Veterans Affairs and Military Installations and the Criminal Justice Committee. Konni attended the University of North Texas, earning a BBA in marketing, and it was at UNT that Senator Burton met her husband of 30 years, Philip. To her left,
That's right.
Yeah. More technical.
A squish.
We have Dr. Merrill Matthews. Dr. Matthews is the resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation. Prior to joining IPI in 2000, he was the Vice President of Domestic Policy at the National Center for Policy Analysis. He also serves as the Vice Chairman of the Texas Advisory Committee on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. To his left, and again I use the term only in proximity terms, is Senator Don Huffines. Senator Huffines is the current state senator for District 16. He is assigned to the Business and Commerce, Education, and Transportation Committees. His business, Huffines Community, is one of the largest real estate land developers in the Dallas-Fort Worth region, and he has been married for 28 years to Mary Catherine, has 4 sons and 1 daughter. Finally, at the end of the panel there is Brad Cates. Brad is a privacy advocate espousing adherence to the fundamental constitutional freedoms, including free speech, opposition to warrantless searches or seizures. He is a former New Mexico legislator and serves as counsel to the House Judiciary Committee of the New Mexico Legislature, and he's also the former director of the Justice Department's Asset Forfeiture Office. Now, launching into this, I would actually like to say, Brad, let's start off talking a little bit about what it was like back in the day, back with the Department of Justice, in the nascent stages of the asset forfeiture, debate, and then looking forward to the work that you've done in New Mexico more recently.
Looking back a few years and putting this in perspective is quite interesting, because no one should ever doubt my commitment, or anyone up here or discussing this, our commitment to law enforcement. I mean, the fundamental power of the state to have prisons, have police protect us, is what sets a society apart from a jungle. I mean, that is the foundation, is it not, of a government. And as a legislator for 8 years, I wrote most of New Mexico's, a lot of New Mexico's criminal codes and firearm enhancements. And, I'm sorry people had bad mothers and had bad lives and had tough times, but after 3 times of violently mugging somebody, I went off the streets and such. And I think I speak for everyone when we say we want to punish criminals. So nothing about this has to do with punishing criminals, but it has to do also about the Constitution. And our Constitution is a miracle amongst all the governments ever in the history of the world. And we're granted certain rights. And some of these make it more difficult for law enforcement, do they not? And we learned in law school, or you probably learned in ninth grade. I mean, it's better that 9 guilty go free than 1 innocent person be punished wrongly. And I think we believe that. And there's rights that we have. I guarantee, what's the worst crime you can think of these days that goes on? Well, according to the legislatures in New Mexico, it's probably child porn. I mean, that bothers everybody, right? I mean, it bothers everyone here. You hate that, don't you? And we'd like to stop it completely. It's just a horrible thing. And I guarantee you, if you do a search warrant, or not a warrant, let's just search all the houses within a mile of here. We are going to catch some child porn people. It's going to be on their computers. But are we going to do that? No. You've got to have a warrant. You have probable cause. So some bad people are going to go free. So that's the two sides of how this works. We have to protect what makes America America. You know, you get down in a pigsty with the pigs and wrestle around, you're going to get all dirty. And we don't want to become what the rest of the world is. And that's what can happen it's a slippery slope. Joe, right? Joe looked a lot younger 25 years ago when I remember him going to these meetings he told us about earlier. You don't remember me, do you? But I spoke a few times, and you remember Buck Ravel? He was the... That's right. I saw it was on the tip of your tongue. And Phil Jordan at the DEA. These were the people that ran the offices here. And I came and I talked about asset forfeiture and the way that it's a great program to take things away from the drug cartels and, of course, now, you know, these international terrorist groups. That's how asset forfeiture came about. We promised didn't we promise them not to bore them about 300 years of British history, but the first law passed by our Congress in 1789 was an asset forfeiture one having to do with maritime commerce. When drug dealers are overseas and they're not here, it's hard to get them, isn't it? But the boat's here, the drugs are here. And when you enforce this stuff against terrorists and drug dealers, okay, that's all right. They're out of the power of our reach. And so maybe there's a place for that. But it's not snatching people walking down the street in amounts of less than $1,000. So, so with that, life goes on. Joe gets older, I got older, and...
I was going to mention one other thing that hadn't changed. I'm sure they can't pick me up for the radio. Buck himself, when he spoke to our 4-H club last year, now he was one of the top officials in the FBI, he's told the kids that law enforcement's hands are tied in America, and then he paused and he looked and he said, and that's a good thing, that's the difference between us and half the rest of the world. That's what Buck said.
Right, and that's why Ed Meese is running the Meese Center at the Heritage Foundation, and that's why people I worked with in the Reagan White House and all, that's why there's a pushback now. And that is why, I mean, I'm counsel, we only have a part-time legislature, and I live in New Mexico now, and I wrote New Mexico's law, and I'm proud of it. And so how did it happen? How did these events happen? How did the ACLU get in bed with me, for heaven's sakes? I mean, I don't know who's more embarrassed, them or me. But now we work together, and with IJ, and I'm the counsel on that lawsuit suing the city of Albuquerque, because they won't stop seizing the stuff. So let's see where we're going with this, and that is, we're not against the police, are we? None of us. We're not against law enforcement. We want it to be done right. And a fundamental piece of this, how do you make it right, is to take the human incentive out of... years ago when I went to law school, it was called the JP courts. You remember that? They used to have them in Texas, and you'd get busted for speeding, and then the cop would take you to the JP, Justice of the Peace, and he got his salary by how much you got fined for speeding. Didn't seem right, does it? And when you're a lawyer, it's called the appearance of impropriety. You ever heard that? The appearance of impropriety. You got to vet clients to make sure there's no conflicts. A judge, if he has one share of stock, he can't take the case, can he? How does it appear to your citizens when the cop that's taken the stuff is going to keep it? You know, I do a lot of work in East Europe, and this is true. This is the crime. You can't have a dirty car in Moscow. And I mean, we can see it's a good law, I suppose, right? And so there, you get stopped, and there's some talk about vague things in Russian, and it's pretty clear that $100 goes to the car wash fund or some such thing. I'm not sure where, but then the money passes hands, and you know, things like this go on in Mexico too. And to your average citizen, that's what forfeiture looks like when it's, I see a bag of money. Gosh, you look like a scuzzer. Maybe you're a foreigner. You don't speak good English, or I don't know exactly, but why do you have the money? You probably shouldn't. Hassle, hassle, hassle. You can go on down the road and we'll just keep the proceeds. Doesn't that feel like a $100 clean car deal to you or to citizens? Right? I mean, it can start feeling. It doesn't look right. It's an appearance of impropriety. Money needs to go to your state treasurer. Whatever else you do, take it to the state treasurer. Why were you elected? Why are you the elected representatives of the people? To appropriate money. To appropriate money. To potholes, to teachers, to cops. And they're tough decisions. There's never enough money, but it's your job. And no, there shouldn't be a side course. What was your question?
Well, actually, I have to lead in with an apology for all the attorneys in the room. I could have certified that for CLE credit, I believe. So we'll remember that for the next time. But no, my question was, and you did answer it. Kind of give us the background of, you know, how we got from, you know, this rare legal backwater in admiralty law to here today. And I think you answered that quite depthly. I have next question for the two senators here on this stage. Senators, first, congratulations both on your very successful freshman term. You both ran very conservative campaigns, and we saw no less in the chambers. So let me ask, and I think a lot of what Brad says alludes to this, why are conservatives so animated about this particular issue? Senator Burton, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, I think particularly those of us who are libertarian-leaning Republicans, we are very civil liberties oriented, and this clearly, to me, is very much an infringement on those. And so when faced with these kinds of occurrences, it's like, how did we get here, and why on earth are we still doing this? And we're ready to dive in and reform it for sure. So it's very simple to me. It's just a civil liberties type of issue for me.
Sure. Certainly, Senator Huffines.
Well, I like to look at it as not a partisan issue, and this brings together liberals and conservatives. It brings together anyone that values the Constitution. And you know, the Constitution was designed to restrain government, and that was the whole purpose of it, is to protect our God-given liberties. And obviously the program abuses that, and people suffer from it. So, you know, to me, it's not about civil asset forfeiture. It's really just about finding somebody guilty. If they're guilty, you can take their stuff, right? If they're not, you don't need to be taking their stuff. So I think we're going to find in the chamber a lot of support, I hope.
Certainly. And Dr. Matthews, you spoke a bit ad nauseum prior about the actual, how this runs afoul of the Fifth Amendment. So we're actually talking about that finding of guilt, and it's stipulated in the Fifth Amendment that everyone has a right to due process. If everyone has a right to due process, and we talked a little bit in the first panel about the difference between in rem proceedings versus in personam proceedings, how is this acceptable when we clearly have someone whom we think is guilty of a crime, yet we are able to dispossess them of their stuff without actually charging them with such?
In the civil asset forfeiture, it's often not the individual, but the property that becomes the target of the investigation. And then you've got the property can't speak for itself. The property can't bring a charge against them. So the person who owns the property and the property is being targeted, you're trying to do the due process from the individual standpoint, but it's the property that's targeted. And so it has raised the question about the due process provision in the Fifth Amendment. There's also the 14th Amendment, which imposes a due process provision on states. So Fifth Amendment's for a federal level, 14th Amendment has a state level. But we've been looking at some of these other issues there. There is in the Fifth Amendment the takings clause. The taking clause says, nor shall property be taken for public use without just compensation. And yet, aren't police officers taking this for public use, sometimes private use, but that's usually the illegal aspect of it. but taking it for public use, and the individual is not being compensated for that. I'll mention a couple of others. You've got the Fourth Amendment's unreasonable search and seizure. You have police officers pulling over people for nothing more than maybe their windows are too tinted and they want to change, they want to look at that, or maybe they feel like they've changed lanes without giving a signal. In some cases, it may be valid charges. In some cases, it appears to be trumped up charges so that you can raise the issue of whether or not there might be something in there that the officer could look at. Then you've got the Eighth Amendment's excessive fines clause. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, for nor cruel or unusual punishment inflicted. If you're able to take all of somebody's property without ever charging them or them ever having to go to jail, there's no criminal charges, may not come before a court, that becomes an excessive fine if you're able to keep all that property. In some cases, the government comes back and says, well, we'll let you have half of your property back. Some people have accepted that deal, some of them haven't, but that looks like an excessive fine. And in addition, one of the things that's happening here is that when you look at the people targeted, they seem to be disproportionately minorities, blacks and Hispanics especially. That seems to be a run afoul of the Equal Protection Clause and certainly raises question about our racial profiling there. So there's several areas here that challenge, I think, the constitutional amendment. The federal government has looked at it, the Supreme Court has looked at it, and in some cases has begun to push back on some of these.
Certainly. And then, you know, obviously, we talked earlier on the messaging panel about some of the, the counter arguments to the push for asset forfeiture reform. And so Brad, you live in New Mexico still. We were told that as this was moving through the House and eventually right before it was signed by the governor, that this would cause the sky to fall. Now, I haven't been to El Paso recently, been able to look across the border. Is that happening in New Mexico currently?
No, of course not. Of course not. The city of Albuquerque won't stop taking the cars. DWI is a terrible problem in New Mexico. I don't know about in Texas, but just a horrible, horrible problem. And we hate to have people drunks driving, and so Albuquerque has an ordinance to take the cars. And okay, that sounds good. But the way it's written, for example, well, first of all, New Mexico's law says civil asset forfeiture is abolished, so you wonder how they do this. But nonetheless, this is a true story right out of the paper a few weeks ago. This girl takes her car in to get repaired and goes out of town for a couple of weeks, comes back and the place is closed. They went bankrupt. So the owner gave her car, or lent her car to one of his friends who was driving drunk. They took the car, they won't give it back to her. So finally they agreed to give it back to her if she'd pay a couple of thousand storage fees. Wait. Does this seem right? None of these examples seem right. You know, the train case in Albuquerque is such a good case. And of course that was a federal case, but you know, the kid's coming from Chicago to LA, and you know, he's the only black guy on the train. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not. And he had the receipt from the bank, and he had the officer's card, and he was going to go be a rap star or something. I don't know. He had a plan in his life, right? It's cash, it's legal. You can't be questioned for. You know what the probable cause is? They list two things in their DEAs. Okay, first of all, he could have transported it in a more conventional way. Yeah, that's probable cause. I missed that one in law school. and secondly, he was headed, and the whole train I might add, to a known drug hotspot, being Los Angeles. And they take his goods. And how about the other guy? This is a true case too. So the guys are going from somewhere in the east, going to Las Vegas to gamble and fix up his sister's house. It was falling down. It was, you know, it was a normal story of life, right? They're entitled, there's legal. So they get busted up in northern New Mexico, and the cop can't quite figure out how to take their 15 grand. So he says, but you haven't heard the last of this. So they get to Albuquerque, and there's a little roadblock waiting, and they pull him over, you know, state policeman. And then this agent from Homeland Security. Talk about mission creep. Did you know they have agents in Homeland Security? I mean, I know about DEA and FBI, but they got Homeland Security, you know, and then they come and so it's this mesh together, I think, that has brought this coalition together of left and right, and I think increasingly the center. The Patriot Act, all of these things that have come together have made us think are we losing our grounding in this country? Have we lost track of what we're doing?
I think that hits on a very, very important point that you don't actually see injected much into the forfeiture discussion, and that is the actual abdication of, local prerogative and state prerogative in law enforcement. You mentioned they had a Homeland Security agent. You also mentioned DEA. These are all agents of the federal government. Now, up until just till the end of last year, there were mechanisms in place, despite Eric Holder having shut down certain elements of equitable sharing. That exempt maybe 14%, I believe, was the estimate that they put out. But prior to, there was still equitable sharing through task force and any number of other mechanisms. And I want to ask this question of the senators, because this is more an abstract question about what it means to believe in states' rights. Should we be engaging in serving and basically enforcing federal law, even in areas where state law does not provide for it?
No.
Nope.
How's that? Yeah, and Matt Krause actually was the come and take it bill, I believe. Are you familiar with that? Where, particularly if they're going to infringe on our Second Amendment rights, we're just not going to fund do what those what the law says, the federal laws say. So I'm all for that. I think he's going to bring that up again. Of course, that's a different. I realize it's a different aspect that we're talking about here, but I'm all for that. I am a huge 10th Amendment person, and people say that they are, but I'm one of those down in Austin that's saying we absolutely, and I realize this isn't going to happen until we've got the will, but I would love to cut the purse strings with the federal government. I mean, all it does is continue to tell us how to spend our money, coming back to us in ways that don't really help Texas, right? So I'm all for.
Well, you can't have cooperative federalism without the cooperation.
Right, yeah.
Senator Huffines.
Well, I definitely don't think we should enforce federal laws that don't benefit the state. I think that was the whole genesis of the ATF and the DEA, was because the federal government passed gun laws in the 30s that the Supreme Court ruled that they were illegal to do that. So they created their own law enforcement agencies to come to the states to take care of that issue. So I think now we have we got Supreme Court cases that said we do not have to enforce federal gun laws if the states don't want to, so they come down and enforce it for us. Right. So I'm not for that.
I think this talk of local and federal interplay, we touched a little bit on it in the previous panel about equitable sharing, and as of right now, as of this very minute, I haven't been able to check the Twitters, so it could have changed. But as of right now, equitable sharing, the entire, the swamp has been drained, if you will. Mm-hmm. The swamp has been drained, but it hasn't been paved over. So, Dr. Matthews, let me ask you, with the program's rubric still in place, just because it doesn't have any money, it never, not having any money never stopped the federal government before. Just because there's no money in that actual account, do you think that this still presents a looming threat, say, for this to resurge?
I do, and just to sort of hit the previous point, the really exciting movement going on in the country today is this embrace of federalism. States are pushing back against the federal government in ways we've not seen them prior to Barack Obama coming into presidency. He's done more to sort of energize federalism and the respect for the Constitution than anybody I've seen in a long time. Unintended completely. But you've got this real pushback and embrace of federalism with the states saying there's a range of things that we can and should be doing, and that we ought to be empowered to do that without the federal government getting involved. Having said that, those involved in these things tend to look for ways to get around the rules. And you've got to impose the rules in a way that will prohibit that. We passed an asset forfeiture law in 2000, CAFRA. That not only did it not do anything apparently effectively, asset forfeitures exploded after we passed a law to sort of try to limit that, which has encouraged Senator Rand Paul to try to come up with another law, which the FAIR Act, I think we've already mentioned that, which is going to try to bring back the Fifth Amendment aspect and impose that. Maybe it will work. It hasn't passed yet. And of course, so much pressure came down upon the Justice Department that they decided to step up and do something. But you never want to underestimate people's ability to look for ways to get around a law if there are good economic incentives for doing that. Yeah. And right now, you've still got significant economic incentives out there that would encourage that. It's one of those situations in which people start out to do good and end up doing well, and doing well becomes the real primary motive for continuing.
So, well, I think that's a great segue into financial incentives. So right now, we under Chapter 59 of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, we actually do have a fairly strict enumeration of what can actually, what money from forfeiture accounts can actually be spent on. Now it's pretty widely specified, and is there any effective guard against supplanting funding? That's another story for another time. But if this were to, if either of the senators were able to snap their fingers and end this practice tomorrow, we'd have to take a special session. Sorry about that. Yeah. But if they were able to end this practice tomorrow, should we consider, or should we actually debate having some form of parachute, a weaning off, if you will? I mean, this is, whether for better or worse, some of these departments have become addicted to this.
No, I'm kind of with representative that was early saying, if we're infringing on the rights of citizens, we need to fix that, and we need to make sure that we are funding our police, those that protect us well, right? I think, it's kind of what I campaigned on to go down to Austin in the first place. We're doing a lot of things that we don't need to be doing, therefore the things that we should be doing aren't getting done well, right? Or funding, I should say. And so what I want to do is get back to funding our constitutional the things that our Constitution tells us that we need to do at the state level. And I think we can do that if we just have a prioritization, a reprioritization from Austin. And it's coming. It's coming with a lot of us new guys in there, actually. The diversions, one of my pet peeves is the funds, for businesses, picking winners and losers, those kinds of things, right? So we need to get rid of that kind of stuff and focus on funding the things that we should be funding at the state level. And, I'm sorry that it's gotten to this way, that they're using these funds to pay salaries and that kind of thing, but that doesn't make it right. And it doesn't, how do you wean people, how do you wean them off of, you can just infringe a little bit on somebody's right? I mean, that's kind of what you're saying if you do it that way, from my perspective. So, no, we need to fix it. We need to fix both at the same time.
Reprioritization.
Right.
Senator Huffines.
The question is, should we kind of parachute out of this with law enforcement? Kind of phase out?
Yeah.
We're either destroying our Constitution or we're not. Exactly. And I am for getting rid of the program completely, 100%. And I'm not for phasing anything out. The police budget should never have been dependent on this. They should never have been counting on this money. I look at it as bad money. That being said, am I open to a compromise system, a compromise down in the legislature to get rid of the program? And I would say yes, I'm open to that. And I'm open to looking at, the key here is to de-incentivize obviously the police from taking people's stuff. So all the money should go down to the state, and like other states have done, it could go to general revenue. I'm going to be proposing that it go to a grant program for code cases, so that this law enforcement could apply to the state for a grant. It's kind of creative, but to solve code cases back in their districts. We've got just a huge backlog of cases that can be solved if they focused on that. I think locally. Also, we could put the money into Crime Victims Fund. But we do not need to incentivize police or any law enforcement agency to take someone's stuff.
And building on what Senator Burton said, you may have to, as a legislature, look at if they lose that funds, do they need additional funds in some sense?
Right.
Having said that, it's not always the case that whether you're talking about the police or military, when they say we need more money, that they always need more money.
Trust me, I know that.
One of the things we saw in the Ferguson issue was what arguably was the over-militarization of the police in some cases, and I think some cases they were getting that equipment from the federal government. Some cases they may have been spending money on it, but we sometimes need to go back and relook at what they're spending money on and making sure it's being used appropriately. Rather than governments tend to find things that they want to spend money on which aren't necessarily good priorities for the public and everybody else, and you have to force them to reassess where they're spending that money and get it back to something that actually serves the purposes that they're there to do.
Well, since you brought that up, I think it's a great place to ask. You know, in some states do not have the general fund diversion. You know, I myself am from Ohio, but I got here as quick as I could, promise. But Ohio is also considering forfeiture reform legislation, and they had, you know, the predictable resistance, I would say. And one of the compromise points was, well, how about the limited use of it where you could clearly demonstrate that somebody has absconded? So in other words, we have a truck with some money and some drugs in it, but we know for a fact that the certificate holder for this truck is in Venezuela. In that case, might we consider civil asset forfeiture? And that's something they're currently considering. Would you be open to that if there was demonstrable proof that the state bore the burden of that would actually have to be satisfied before they could forfeit the property in a similar fashion as it goes on right now?
If you're asking me, probably not. I probably wouldn't be satisfied with that. I look at it as criminal asset forfeiture and civil asset forfeiture. If it's criminal asset forfeiture, you need to be convicted of the crime, then you can take their stuff. The stuff that was involved in the crime. Contraband's always going to be confiscated immediately. So I don't look at civil asset forfeiture as ever being a proper venue to, because always there's going to be incentive to do it, right? Because it's always worth something or they wouldn't take it. Somebody's getting some money and you just follow the money. So I'm not for it. I just feel like if it needs to be a criminal case and we need to be found guilty, if somebody's found guilty of that or the enterprise of conducting an illegal enterprise, you can take their stuff, otherwise you can't.
Yeah.
Well, forfeiture is a process, a legal process, but there's the work that police do. And we like to say that the New Mexico law doesn't change the work that police do in any way. They go out and they solve crimes. Really, this is all about how the prosecutors then take care of the legal work. So when a cop's out there and there is abandoned property, that's already covered under state law, not forfeiture law. Abandoned property is taken. Contraband's taken. If there's something that's clearly contraband, it's taken. Evidence of a crime is taken. So nothing changes about that part. So it's really not an exception to forfeiture so much as an established police procedure. And if something's abandoned, it's abandoned.
Illustrating the actual delineation between seizure, that which the police do, and forfeiture, that which the prosecutors do.
Yes, right.
Excellent. So I guess a good question about that is, and then let's, again, kind of get into a more gray area here. Let's talk about perhaps an area where there actually might have been some criminal wrongdoing, again, of any level. We all saw what happened in Philadelphia, in their forfeiture machine, that an individual's, a family's son selling a small dime bag of marijuana on the porch, getting the entire house forfeited. In cases like that, are there any forms of relief that can be built in, at the very least, for the innocent owner while the defense is being mounted? Say any sort of interlocutory replevin, anything like that. And in, say, New Mexico, does that already exist?
We wrote replevin in specifically for that reason. A car gets taken in a criminal case, and it's sitting there waiting for the criminal trial, all the while running up cost to somebody, to the state or a car dealer who's toting the note. And so we have a provision for replevin to address that specifically.
And then let me say, Senators, Dr. Matthews, what about houses? These are people's homes. Even if suspected of a crime, should there be replevin exception, a temporary restoration of ownership?
Under Senator Paul's bill, if I remember correctly, you have a certain amount of time that the person has to be charged with a crime. I believe it was 21 days or something of that nature, but you have to charge them with a crime. And that gets to Senator Huffines' point, which is under criminal asset forfeiture, you have due process. Right. You're entitled to an attorney if you can't afford one. You're entitled to a trial. You have these process rights that are not there if you have the civil asset forfeiture, and so people are having to spend their own money in order to try to get their own money or property back. They're having to pay the attorneys to do that. Sometimes they're able to get a judgment that will force the police to reimburse the attorney's fees, but in many cases they just lose those fees. So turning this into, if it's a criminal, if there's something criminal, make it criminal, and then that gets the due process rights in there, or do something which gets that person out and exonerated quickly.
They would never have the right to take the property if they weren't convicted. So you're asking, should there be relief? You're talking about taking people's stuff and property and cash or whatever without ever being convicted of a crime or even charged with a crime. Right. So why would there be relief to that? I mean, to me, it's a clear violation of due process.
But that's illustrative of one of these gray areas here, is that if there is actual pending criminal procedure, that house or that car could be seized due to due to evidentiary process.
Well, if they haven't been convicted, why are you taking their car? Why are you taking their house if they haven't been? Right. They might be completely innocent.
Absolutely.
So that is true, and that's the mechanism for providing that relief is much what Brett said is the actual.
Well, you should never take it.
Then you don't have people are arrested that aren't guilty. I mean, they're not convicted. But while they're under arrest and in the criminal proceedings, it's inconvenient to them, right? They have to pay from their own pocket if they can afford it, lawyers. Their things are held as evidence. So in the criminal proceeding, it's a great inconvenience. So why exacerbate that by moving the whole thing over to civil and then having none of Professor Matthews' rights that he delineates happen? It's a wrong system. You think this can't happen to you, but I mean, I could cite 50 cases, as anyone up here could. It happens sometimes, and that it happens even once is reason that the law is written wrong. There's a family, and they run a little Mexican restaurant in Iowa. You probably all know this case. It's pretty well known, but so they never do a lot of business. I mean, 5 or 10 or 8,000. They never really do $10,000 in business, and I don't know the reasons why the IRS in this case was on their case. Maybe just a Mexican family in Iowa must be drug dealers. I don't know why they bothered them, but they took their $35,000, seized it from them. And the Institute for Justice defended them, and they eventually got it back a year. How are you, any of you small business owners, how would you like to lose $35,000 from your current cash? Be tough to overcome, wouldn't it?
$7,000 in legal fees to get that money back.
Precisely. Institute for Justice helped those people. Maybe they don't have time to help you, and so you're going to pay $10,000 to even start with any kind of case with a lawyer. Now, Attorney General Holder started some reforms, and then it stopped dead in the tracks with the new Attorney General. This is the ultimate irony with what happened to the Justice Department fund. You understand this, how this federal fund works? The money goes into this asset forfeiture fund, and then they share it with the departments. Okay, Congress got starved last year because they didn't have any money, and for the first time, this is the ultimate irony. So Congress last December said, we need money, we can't pay the bills. Let's see if there's any special accounts that aren't in the Treasury. And they looked around, they found $1 billion sitting in a special unappropriated account at the Justice Department, right? And so in the budget reconciliation, they took the whole $1 billion to the right way. I mean, that's the right way. Congress then appropriated the money. It was such an ironic twist, was it not?
And we certainly saw a backlash in the press about that. We saw a lot of editorials saying, "Oh, well, they should release that money," and of course, any conservative on the stage would say there's a bit of irony in finally finding out that the federal government are not honest brokers on such matters, but regardless. But down in front, you mentioned the point $67,000 in legal fees. You know, I've actually heard the argument, $67,000 in legal fees, sounds like you were afforded plenty of due process. What do y'all think about that? Well, I mean, do you think that that is an argument? Because a lawyer can't just sit there thumbing through a book and racking up billing hours. They actually need to go and they litigate.
But Derek, what if you didn't have any money for an attorney? And that affects many, many people, if not the majority of the people that are victims of this process, is they don't have the money for counsel. And if you're convicted or if you're charged with a crime, you generally get a counsel. So this whole asset forfeiture deal is just really about taking advantage of those that can't afford legal counsel.
Which could be, and this gets to the point of Senator Huffines, if you can't get rid of civil asset forfeiture, maybe the best option is to say that if the police do seize money and that is returned to them, the department has to pay the person's legal fees, interest on the money while it was being held, other expenses that might have involved. In essence, create a cost benefit for the police department that says, if I'm really sure on this, then I'll go ahead and try to do something. But if I'm not really sure, or if I think I'm really just trying to gain some cash here, it could end up costing my department more than we would ever gain from this.
The English rule, loser pays.
Well, the only problem with that, somebody's going to have to sue the police department and get their money back. And if they don't have the money to do it, they're not going to get it back.
That's why I say you can do it in law. If they can't charge the person and keep it, and they've got to turn it back, then they've got to pay any legal fees without being sued.
But they'd have to be convicted of the crime. The key is just to make sure we don't take people's stuff unless you're convicted of a crime.
Yes, I agree.
We're about to get to question and answers in just about 4 minutes. But before we do, I'd like to ask one question of all our panelists up here. So 2017, through your best divination through a crystal ball, what can we see proposed and what might we see passed?
In the state, federal.
Yes.
I don't know about the federal.
Well, both, and Brad can talk about other states as well if you like.
I think the will is definitely there for reform on civil asset forfeiture. Maybe I'm being Pollyannish here, but I do believe we can get that done. Absolutely.
In the Senate.
I'm sorry?
In the Senate. In the Texas Senate, their will is there, but in the Texas House. Exactly.
Dr. Matthews.
I'm sorry, you're nice, but
Let me speak at the federal level. You've got some Republican presidential candidates who have a libertarian strain through them. And this tends to be attracted to conservatives with that libertarian element in there. And so I think the key aspect there is to get it on their agenda so that when one of them takes the White House, and I think there's a fair chance one of them will, they step up and move this. It needs to be moved from the White House. White House says we want this done. I think it will probably get done.
I would think we have a better chance to get something done federally in Washington than we do almost in Austin. That'd be my gut on that. And I would say that just because in Washington we've got a lot of discourse now on this issue. We've got presidential candidates talking about it. Of course, Senator Paul's talked about it. You've got the Koch brothers talking about it. And in Austin, we don't have anybody talking about it except Konni and me. So, I mean, there's a few people talking about it, but Konni's done a good job of bringing up awareness on it. And really, the whole issue is bringing up awareness about it, because so many people really aren't aware of it. They don't understand it, and so we'll continue to do that in Austin. I do feel confident we can get it out of the Senate, but can we get it all the way through the process? It's hard. It's going to be really hard. And when I start the process, and I'll follow Senator Burton's lead on it, but we're looking for complete repeal, okay? I'm not looking to tweak the system because I think the whole system doesn't deserve to be tweaked. It's wrong, and it's 100% wrong. So that makes it harder.
Brad.
Whenever I speak about it, I try to differentiate between civil forfeiture and criminal, because I'm still a big proponent of criminal asset forfeiture. When you arrest people, there's consequences when they're convicted, and they should not walk away with the proceeds of crimes, the facilitation of crimes, and such as that. So New Mexico's, we strengthened our criminal and just totally abolished, as you've said, the civil. And I think that'll work out nice. I've heard that probably Senator Grassley, the chairman of Senate Judiciary, is going to go forward with the bill. It won't be quite as bold as Rand Paul's, of course, but in an ironic twist as well, Washington style, you would expect a lot of liberal Democrats that might support this, such as the ACLU. But Senator Leahy, the vice chairman, and some others such as that, a lot of them, I don't want to say him, I don't want to name any names, but are beholdening in various ways to big city unions, such as police unions. And so they're not all reacting in the way that we might expect them to. But I'm hearing there might be a bill this spring that would at least get us part of the way. Congressman Hyde, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee that you mentioned in 2000, when the last reform took place, said this. You can look up his quote because it will be more accurate than I can do it. But he said something like, "We only did half what we needed to do, but I just couldn't fight the police unions." And that's why this money thing stayed here. But the money's the key to it. Well, not, what is a key to it? The money and the due process rights, they're both important.
Well, that brings us to our point in the program where we will turn over to audience questions. Sir, down here in front.
Are we doing microphones this time? We all got slapped last time. I haven't forgotten that yet. It was me.
We play good moderator, bad
Okay, well,
moderator.
one of our speakers was, this is on? Yeah. One of our speakers was kind enough to point out that I've gotten a lot older, and I think it may be addling my brains or something, but I'm confused with this federal sharing of the seizure stuff. If, just to put it in a simple way, the federal government will pay us to enforce some federal laws, but they'll punish us if we try to enforce other federal laws, not to mention immigration. Is that right? I mean, isn't this kind of a confusing, bewildering thing? You know, where's the reward, where's the punishment in the rationality of federal law?
Well, this one's just mixed it up too much. It's just too intertwined. So there again, New Mexico's law, we made it so that state agencies could not run around New Mexico's law to circumvent it by going straight to the feds. We prohibited that. And it amounts less than 50,000. So we were thinking, you know, get those big cases, the big international real cases. There is a role to play for civil asset forfeiture in the international arena where the parties are not in the United States and such, bigger cases. So we set it at 50,000. You know, when I was I was a prosecutor in Dallas years ago, and that's why I was speaking to these groups. And I never doubted that I was doing good. And I had a business degree, and I really, to my core, believed it. And looking back, I don't think I ever screwed up one of them in a way that I didn't do right. I mean, I took an entire block in West Dallas. I think it was called Numa Street, and the owner was kind enough to get knifed to death in the county jail. So I perfected it and sold the whole block, and the Secretary of Housing came and we knocked down some of the houses and gave it to Habitat for Humanity. And I sold one to this old barber. He was 85. He'd been barbering and renting for 45 years, and I sold it to him. Sold it at the house. And Rodney, the cosmetologist, was open, and there was a city councilwoman, and she'd come. Every time I was over there, it's, "Praise the Lord, it's Brad Cates." And I felt good about that. I liberated that neighborhood. I never thought twice about it, that there was anything wrong with the process. And so that's what you see from your police and all. They're seeing that the good that they're doing, and it's not many that's doing it wrong. But we can preserve the core of letting them do their job of fighting criminals. I took a house in Swiss, is that what it's called? And that was really kind of run down then, but now I understand it's kind of a millionaire neighborhood. This was an Italian-aid property and really nice, and they were doing a lot of drugs in it. And I took it. And the kernel, the core of starting to know something was wrong, it only occurred to me years later, but I can remember the man saying it. I took it from him, took this unit from him, and I flipped it and got title in no time, made the government $100,000, put a young contractor in it, and he fixed it and sold it, and it was the beginning of a renaissance in the neighborhood. It was great. But the man that I took it from one day said to me in federal court, he says, "It's not right." He said, "Okay, maybe I didn't have the cash to keep the place up. I had to keep them rented. You know, it's okay, maybe I could have done better, but you took my property," and I had big plans for that. And of course, I got all of the drug dealers out. I mean, I did a good job, I thought. But wasn't that the kernel, though? This man, I'm sure was not a drug dealer, you know, and he lost his property. And that's the kernel of what's wrong with the system. In the name of doing good there, we sure squelched his constitutional rights, didn't we?
But Brad, in this issue, what's happening with equitable sharing is if a state passes a law to try to limit civil assets forfeiture abuses, there's this process that's been going on where the local police may confiscate something, send it to the federal government, and then the federal government then sends them back most of that, and then it's no longer subject to the state law. So that's sort of the state federal connivance, for lack of a better term, that allows that money to still be used. Is that a fair assessment?
All that property in West Numa Street comes to mind. I'm not sure it was, but there were 10 or 15 properties. I took the whole block, right? And I sold it to the cosmetologist and the barber and the this and the that and the whole Habitat for Humanity. And the mayor, we were having a big ceremony giving the properties away, you know, and he said, so exactly how did you accomplish all this? I mean, where's the money? I see that 10% came down, and I said, well, actually, Mr. Mayor, the process in this part of town be called the city be toting the note. And so all of a sudden, I turned all the proceeds. It was a federal case, but all those proceeds that were paid on all those notes went to the city. And is that, wasn't I, if there had been a state law then, wouldn't that have circumvented the whole thing? Probably.
Of course, the question today would be, did Rodney have the requisite 700 hours of barbering training in order to actually...
Yeah, exactly.
He made nice cosmetology work. I saw that.
Just a general question. Has anybody looked into the expansion, I guess the growth of borrowing and bonding in cities and municipalities compared to what their asset forfeiture policies might be? Anybody tried to look at a connection there? That's the thing I'm also concerned about, is that we might see an uptick in this to make up for revenue when property values are falling or people are, you know, having to leave their homes in a bad economy, and that this might be filling holes in budgets as well.
Well, I say I can take a stab at that. No, nobody, I don't believe, has looked at that yet. In fact, simply due to just the lack of data, especially here in Texas, you know, you pretty much have to trigger an open records request in order to get top-level forfeiture data. And with just the lag in reporting and everything else, you know, those usually aren't available to at least, you know, with a 1.5 year lag or more. So with that, one of the things we've done at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and one of the papers we'll be releasing here shortly, actually looks at where are the forfeitures happening. In other words, where's the activity in the forfeiture account happening, not just in how much is being sat on in these different venues, but what's the churn, how much is being spent. And not only that, but looking at it per capita. Because I know it was mentioned up here about the issue in Ferguson. You know, Department of Justice, you know, in their analysis found that, you know, almost, you know, there was a 50% uptick in their actual use of their fines and forfeiture account, and that is, you know, not only, you know, that only not takes up that bigger part of the budget, but that is supplanting the budget that should have been duly appropriated in the first place. So that would be an interesting avenue of research, I do have to say. Any other comments on that?
The city of Albuquerque has a specific line item from the CAR program as how much they're going to make this year, and it's built right in next year's budget.
But what of course, if, you know, everyone sees the light and nobody drives drunk anymore?
This is likely to happen.
Sir, towards the back. Then we'll come down.
It seems to me a lot of this is due to a shift that we've had in law enforcement from being peace officers. And earlier you made a comment about cops going out and, you know, defending crimes. Well, what they've done is they've made cops be revenue generators, right? And the problem we have is this is about revenue generation, not about law enforcement. So on a state level, Senator Huffines and Senator Burton, couldn't we do something like where we cap the amount of revenue that police departments and law enforcement agencies could have as a result of seizures as a percentage of their budget, and say that, you know, 98% of their budget has to come from appropriations from the governing body versus from seized assets and just take away the incentive that way, because it's a financial incentive. Take it away by restricting their ability to budget it.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's not a bad idea. I'm thinking about that. I mean, it's not a bad idea. 'Cause, I mean, and you know, we've certainly got legislation ready to go. That's not part of it, but we're certainly open to those kinds of items to talk about. But you know, I want to go back to what you were talking about as far as they are, and I totally agree with you. That's how we, unfortunately, a lot of us see police officers these days, as revenue generators, and that is unfortunate. And I will tell you that I just visited with our DA, our new, not DA, Chief of Police in Fort Worth. And one of the things, and I was so happy to hear him say, is they're going to go back to, and apparently they did not have this before he came in, is they're going to go back to the beat system where, you know, the police officers are in a certain area all the time so that they can, you know, connect with the neighborhood. They can, you know, be friends with people that, again, they're to be protectors, not just out to look for crime or to, you know, to be revenue generators. So I'm hoping that, you know, that will spread more. I'm going to be talking to all the different chiefs of police, as a matter of fact, about that kind of thing, because I know from my perspective there is that thought process out there, and I think it's very important that they all understand that, and that they realize, you know, that that's part of the tension that's there, unfortunately, and I think we need to start there on that for sure.
I'll try a quick answer to that question, and you have to really think about criminal laws in general, and they're really about debtor's prison, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. Whether it's a fine, you know. And the thing is about governments is the government's ruled by force, and governments are going to come in and say you either pay the fine or you're going to jail. So they've got the same. They've got that. To me, I've got a proposal to decriminalize all traffic violations and let the cities work on collecting their revenue through the civil courts just like any other business would, right? And it's really kind of odd if you think about it, because governments cost them a lot of money to put somebody in jail. It's $80 a night or $125 a night, and if you don't pay your fine, well, you go to jail. Well, that just costs the government more money, right? And so you're burning off your fine by costing the government more money and not paying it. So I think there's a whole lot we can look at in the criminal justice side of where we need to be in this state and in this country.
Do we have a question actually right down here, and then we'll work our way to the back again.
Yes, thank you. Senator Huffines,
You mentioned earlier about criminal asset forfeiture. And I understand the difference between civil and criminal, but my issue is if you then give them the right to take the property after they're convicted, are you not giving them a huge financial incentive to make sure they're convicted? That's the one issue I have. If you insist on making sure you have forfeiture and a conviction, then you are giving them an incentive to make sure there's a conviction. And I think that's a real problem in our general system. And then I have a wider question. I think this is an incredibly important issue. But what is the question I have, I was very seriously politically active for a number of years. In fact, Senator Corona sponsored one of our pro-parental rights bills, so he was very helpful in that. But as I got more and more involved in the government, what I realized is it seems like 90% of our programs that are creating evil in our state are all done to generate federal dollars. And I just see that over and over. I see that divorces going up because there are federal dollars and incentivize that. CPS takes people because of that. Asset forfeiture, that's another one. We're putting people in prisons now because the federal government pays for more prisoners. I mean, I see it everywhere. What's so special about this one small part of it now?
Well, I think you've got a very good point.
I mean,
they're all legitimate issues, and we're here to tackle them as fast as we can. I'll tell you that. Now,
You have to start somewhere.
I say on incentivizing a criminal conviction, they've already, I don't see, it definitely, I can see how you could say that, and it might, but look, they're going to have the money anyway. I mean, they either took it without the conviction, so beforehand, or they're going to take it after they get the conviction. So either way, the perpetrator of the crime is not going to end up with the asset. At least At least he's fighting one
Getting
case at a
around
time.
due process.
I mean,
And
so
at least
he's
with
got
the-
due process.
At least
yeah.
with the
Right.
criminal asset forfeiture, you do have the jury involved there. So you have a trial and a jury, and so there's a check on that should minimize, I would say, being able to put people in jail who actually weren't doing a crime.
Burden of proof.
Burden of proof.
Thank you. I'm Jared Atkinson. I'm the chairman of the Texas Young Republican Federation PAC. So as many of you know, everybody who is in here who knows me knows, I have a trial next week for having dogs. So going to one of Senator Huffines' bills, like if we could add having dogs to not being a criminal thing, that'd be cool, because I'm going to go to trial and I'm going to lose because I know that the people of Flower Mound are completely brainwashed into thinking that anytime anybody gets a ticket, they've done something wrong, and therefore they have to punish that person, and all this kind of good stuff. It doesn't matter if there's a law in the books or not. So I guess my point here is in bringing this up is part of the brainwashing is. And especially with this, they've got a car that rolls around town that's a citizen patrol, and it's a red Magnum Charger thing, I don't know, whatever. And on the back of it, it says paid for with the proceeds of whatever it is, like drug dealers, or because all the people in Flower Mound are drug dealers. So they tell you in big bold letters that this vehicle was paid for by assets seized from bad people. So maybe there's like a little tiny little bill that could say you can't say that. You can't tell the citizens that every time they're stealing from people, it's a good thing.
Well, just that point real fast. Any municipal ordinance is enforced with criminal penalties, just about. Not mowing your grass, for instance. If you don't mow your grass, they fine you. Well, if you don't pay the fine, what are they going to do? They put you in jail, right? And if you don't want to go to jail, what are they going to do? It ain't going to be pretty. So, just to put that in a civil court and in that context just really separates the police from having they need to deal with the bad guys. They need to deal with the bad crimes. They've got a very difficult job, and very, very difficult. So the problem in society today, in my opinion, is that we have so many laws. You can break so many rules and so many laws, just leaving your house, going to work, whatever it is, that people get callous and they don't want to pay any more attention to it. And it starts to be us against them, and people don't look at the police as the good guys anymore. They're looking at the police as, what did I do wrong? Right? Every time you see them, what did I do wrong? That's not a good situation. We need to have the police be always thought of as our heroes.
First, I'd like to thank Right on Crime and IPI for putting this on. I think this is a great topic and really important, and I particularly like the fact that here's an issue where people on the left and the right can come together. I think that's really important. Secondly, a lot of as these issues have developed, some of you may be aware of Radley Balco's. He has a blog on that right-wing publication, the Washington Post, and it's a fantastic blog talking about asset forfeiture, talking about police abuse, and he's a libertarian, but he does a really good job on reporting on these things, including information on Ferguson. There are like 90 municipalities in the county of St. Louis County, 90 separate municipalities, each one with police forces, each one trying to raise revenue. And so you drive a car with a broken taillight, you can be stopped 5 times in the matter of 2 or 3 miles and rack up thousands of dollars of fines, and they go after the poor, and it's a really abusive situation. So it's not just asset forfeiture. There are other issues that are related, but I think this left-right coalition could actually make the world a better place if we could actually get something done. Now, whether it'll happen in Texas, I don't know. I've dealt with the police a lot. I think you're going to have a hard time getting anything through down in Austin, but maybe at the federal level there's a better chance. But anyway, it's great to have this dialogue on these important issues. Thanks.
Go up here, over there, and then in the back.
Well, to say a word on behalf of the police, My little brother, as I mentioned, is a chief of police, and he actually was the chairman of the interagency task force that tried to coordinate policing agencies through those 90 jurisdictions that were just discussed in the St. Louis area until he left that. My little brother loathes revenue generation policing, loathes it, and a lot of other people do. We have friends, I'm not going to name them, but friends here in Dallas who are famously close with the highest levels of the Dallas Police Department. And at their ranch and at their house, I've met and spoken with many of these people. I mean, I'm talking about chiefs and divisional chiefs. Most cops hate revenue collection. They just hate it. That's not why they're cops. Now, it is true that it's a very treacherous stew with the benevolence and the unions and all the rest of this sort of thing and retirement plans coming in. It's also true that most of the police associations do a very poor job of representing not just the rank and file, but even very senior police officers. So you would be surprised how much support police officers, even at the highest levels, would give the kind of reform that we're all discussing here today.
Absolutely.
Let's go over to the.
You know, part of Mr. Sullivan speaks to an issue that I'm sure we've all heard the word, but you wonder how it interplays with forfeiture, but I think it does, and the word is over-criminalization. Yes. I mean, I worked with Judge Kaczynski in the White House, and he's a judge, as you most know, in the California's federal judge, and he said that they ought to repeal 3 federal criminal laws a day just to get back. When I was, active in this, there were 1,500 criminal laws, and now there's 4,500. There were 9,000 federal administrative criminal laws. This was, like 20 years ago, right? Today there's 300,000. God come up with a pretty short list, and beyond that, people get confused, and people can't be expected to know them all. That's right. And so that's what you're speaking about with the police. It's like, give them a few sets of laws that they can cleanly and efficiently enforce, that everyone intuitively understands are wrong, and you'll have a lot better policing force, you'll have a lot better citizen compliance, and we'll have a lot better criminal justice system.
Perhaps a strong mens rea component.
As well.
Sir.
I'd like to thank the senators for being here talking about this subject tonight. You're awful brave, because I will tell you there's many places in this state where this is at epidemic levels. There's the police associations will pound you and vilify you for messing with the golden egg. And I can tell you, Waco's one of them.
For example.
Hey, there were guys that were released, there were guys that were finally released in their underwear.
Are you serious?
In their underwear. Underwear and socks.
Everything else gone.
There are people that have already lost their vehicles, gone back to the banks. It's incredible what's going on. And it's at epidemic levels around this state. The I-10 corridor, minorities, cash stripped away from them, one after the other. We've got to do something. We've got to reel this in. It's a serious matter. And if people are going to have faith in the law, they've got to come to terms with it.
Sir, I think you bring up a very, very good point. One that I don't believe that we've danced around up here, but I don't believe that we've said directly, is that this fundamentally affects the legitimacy of criminal law.
Right.
Or the government entirely.
Or the government entirely, exactly. And that's definitely a point moving forward I think we should all keep in the forefront of our minds, especially with the description that Brad started out with. There hasn't been a single person on this stage that's anti-law enforcement. I don't know about Matt Simpson, but I kid. Matt's a very cogent policy expert. But this is one of the areas where it is getting to a level of epidemic simply in how it contradicts the legitimacy of the law. Sir.
My question goes to the using of the police as revenue generators again, and the perception that the public has of police. and particularly the questions for Senator Huffines. And I'm kind of curious, if you make a traffic incident from a criminal issue to a civil issue, you've lowered the bar. You've taken it from the government needing to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt to only needing to prove their case as a preponderance of the evidence. So it's going to be much easier now for the government to force you to turn over money in a traffic incident than it is. So wouldn't you be actually making it a little easier for the police to be revenue generators?
Let me clarify what the bill would do. The bill would make it so if you were convicted of the crime, that the government would, the only way they could enforce collection is in a civil manner. So you still have to be convicted of a criminal offense. It just enables you to, it keeps the government from being able to put you in jail for not paying your debt. Look, guys, when you're convicted, if you got money and you got means, this isn't a big deal. Most criminal cases, you can pay your speeding ticket, you can pay your driver's responsibility surcharge, you can handle that stuff. You can get counsel. But we're creating a permanent underclass in our society that cannot handle it. And look, it means a lot to somebody to get stuck with a $300 tax because they were going 10 miles over the speed limit. And it's really a tax. And if you don't pay that, what happens? Right? Failure to appear in court, you get stopped again, what happens? Your car gets towed, that's $1,500 on top of your $300. You have no job, you lose your license, you're gonna get divorced because mama's not happy anymore. You go back home and mama gets divorced, she's got all the kids. Who takes care of the kids? State of Texas does. Right? We're destroying our society by over-criminalizing our society. And if we would just step back and just take a look at it and with common sense, and just say, look, we're going to just stop it, and we're going to just take a time out and a pause and look at it for more that you don't pay your plumber, you don't pay your cable bill, they don't put you in jail, right? They don't put you in jail for not paying your phone bill. I've got a business, I don't put people in jail for not paying me, I just don't sell them anything else, right? So, it's true. So, I don't see government being any different in that aspect. Mm-hmm.
You just touched on a point that I think is awfully important. The sheer cost of legal process is totally out of control, especially for people who have more modest means. But even for people who are moderately well off, you can be bled dry fighting a legal action with very little opportunity. And so I guess this is a philosophical question, but is there some mechanism to rein in what I will call prosecutorial abuse of discretion? Because a lot of it is, okay, I'm going to take you to trial, and unless you come up with a high-priced lawyer, I'm going to convict you. And that is, by its nature, oppressive. And so it seems to me that there's a fundamental problem with the ability or the inability of ordinary citizens to contest actions that are taken by government officials, some of whom obviously will be policemen, but more often it's going to be your prosecutor, your assistant district attorney who is filling out the papers. And so I wonder if there's a solution for that is rational.
I would just say that we could fund that account more money, you know, so make it our, and we're going to be looking at, my team's going to be looking at different things related to criminal justice issues, and one of them is specifically related somewhat to that, and we're going to be looking at least your public defender. If you're indigent, your public defender needs to contact you within 3 business days, right? I mean, that would be common sense, and that doesn't happen. That does not happen in these county jails. I mean, you could sit in there for a month and your public defender's never going to even talk to you, if they could even talk to you. We've got a problem in the jail system related to phone calls, right? How much phone calls cost? How much can you can't even, and we've got a problem in the jails, you can't even talk to anybody. You got to do it through a video screen. I mean, there's just to even communicate with somebody outside of a jail is a very difficult process. And we just start with those little issues, and it's a huge revenue generator for the county. The Dallas County makes about $1 million a year on the phone calls the prisoners make. They're charging them $5 a minute, and the county gets $3, and the phone company gets $2. I think there's going to be some federal legislation to that effect and taking care of that coming up. But if there isn't, it's something the state of Texas certainly needs to get involved in. I'm not going off in the weeds on all that. I'm sorry.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to call time on this one. But before you go, I hope that everybody has an opportunity to join us and our panelists next door for some light refreshments. And hopefully, if you weren't able to ask a question, that you'll be able to ask of it there. But before we do head next door, please, one more time, a round of applause for our panelists. Well, thank you everybody for participating, and we should have this.